Senator Jacobson.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Senator Bostelman, this may not be the question for you, and if not, that's fine. I can ask one of the testifiers. But with regard to the fund and the projects that are out there, I'm assuming we're going to need every penny in that fund plus the ongoing assessments to really accomplish the cleanup effort that needs to occur. Is that correct?
That would be the intent of the fund, but there will be someone behind me that I think
Thank you.
That too.
Yeah. I keep hearing about rating of funds. I'm certainly hoping this is not one on the list.
This is, so the funds are funds, let me see if I understand the question. The funds are funds that are not general funds or cash funds. These are funds that the petroleum users themselves give, but there is some excise tax given. So
I've just heard that maybe doesn't matter.
Oh, okay.
I think there have been attempts to raid these funds before.
Yep.
Thank you.
Other questions? Looks good. More supporters for 868. Welcome to Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, and good afternoon. My name is Tim Keir. I am the Executive Director and Registered Lobbyist for the Nebraska Petroleum Marketers Convenience Store Association. That's spelled TIM, last name KEIGHER. Appearing before you today in support of LB 868. We'd like to thank Senator Bostelman for bringing this bill forward. NPCA represents petroleum marketers, convenience store operators, and truck stop operators throughout the state of Nebraska. A little history of how the Lux Fund came along. Back in 1988, the federal EPA came out with some new regulations for underground tanks owners and required that they upgrade their tanks to prevent releases, put in release or detect releases that may occur, and also provide financial responsibility. I won't bore you with a lot of the details of the upgrading and the technical aspects of it, but it is required for anybody that owns an underground tank, with the exception of farm and residential tanks under 1,100 gallons used for non-commercial purposes, are not covered by these regulations. So when they came up with the financial responsibility part, it requires that if you handle more than 10,000 gallons of petroleum per month, you must provide $1 million worth of coverage per incident and $1 million in aggregate if you own 100 tanks or less. But if you own 100 or 101 or more, you must provide $2 million. Well, no insurance company wanted to provide this coverage because it was kind of like buying the burning building, because there was already some contamination in the ground. So all the states, I believe, came up with some type of state fund to help fund this. We fund ours through 0.9 cents on gasoline and 0.3 cents on diesel. It brings in approximately, I think, $11.5 million a year. And I think it's worked well. I do have larger members of mine who would rather pay a private insurance company $300 to $1,500 a tank. The problem is that the insurance companies only want to insure the new sites where there's all the bells and whistles, virgin property in that. So we, as an organization, support the underground tank fund and the 0.9 and the 0.3 because it covers everybody. Everybody pays the same fee. The more gallons you do, the more you pay. If you're a smaller marketer and had to go to private insurance, you'd be paying more per gallon than you would if you're paying this 0.9. So to try and address your question, yes, the fund has been rated many times. I know that a former governor took $10 million out of it to balance his budget. There's been money taken out of it to help with ethanol production credits, cattle waste operations, and a lot of other things, which we've never agreed with. But that was the will of the legislature. So I guess with that, I'll try and answer any other questions you may have.
Senator Jacobson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Keir, for testifying today. I would say it kind of also for part of my colleagues to understand it. Being a banker, I remember when the leaky underground storage tank fund was first created, also known as LUST, which is why I always remember it. But it's a very valuable fund from the standpoint that when you really look at the domino effect, you have an old underground tank back before anybody knew this could be a problem. They rust out, the tanks leak, they contaminate water supplies, contaminate soil. All of a sudden now somebody gets ready to sell that site nobody's going to touch it with a 10-foot pole because there's cleanup costs. And then you look at lenders out there that are trying to take collateral. They're trying to go out and get an SBA loan, for example, and they're saying we're not going to touch those sites. So this fund has done a lot to really help clean up sites and actually make properties more usable. And I think without the laws that were put in place, it would be almost impossible for a lender to go out and loan against that for collateral, because if they ever had to take possession of it, they don't want to find themselves in the line of liability. So this is an important fund. I don't know. I'm curious how much is still out there. I'm guessing probably in the rural areas, we've got potentially some sites that have been abandoned, but do you have a read on how big this problem still is today?
Well, first of all, I'd also like to thank the Department of Energy and Environment for catching the date in different sections. I didn't catch that, they did. They submitted some comments online, and they provided you with these two pieces of paper I have here that talk about how many sites that they have cleaned up over the year. So this is as of December 31st, 2023. My other thing is, when you buy glasses, make sure you get the ones with the readers in them, because it doesn't work otherwise. So there's 617 known leaking sites. There's 390 active investigations. There's long-term monitoring on 48. There's also a backlog of orphan tanks where there's no responsible party, 179. And like was mentioned earlier, the 400,000 that was been spent. The estimated future leaking underground tanks through 2024 is about 50 to 60 a year. The one thing I do give I keep calling DEQ, but Energy and Environment credit for is that they've been very good about allocating the money as the claims come in, so that there is not a lot of excess there for any of our friends to steal it. So, they've closed, since 1983, they've closed 7,523 sites. So I think they're doing a very good job. And going forward, while we have all these bells and whistles on everything, you still have some releases. And for those smaller marketers out there in rural Nebraska, this is the best, form of insurance for them. So I don't know if that answered your question.
It does. Thank you.
Senator Brandt.
Thank you, Chairman Moser. Thank you, Mr. Kerr, for your testimony. Does this just cover petroleum? So if we have a massive liquid fertilizer leak,
It's just petroleum. Petroleum and hazardous materials, I believe, is the correct term. So
okay.
mainly just petroleum, gasoline, diesel fuel.
And then how many dollars are in the fund today?
I don't know the answer to that. I know they bring in about 11.2 million.
It's a year.
There's probably less than 4 million, I would guess,
All right.
just
Thank
basing
you.
upon previous numbers I had.
Okay, other questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your testimony. Other supporters?
I've got a local story.
Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Robert J. Hallstrom, Hallstrom. Appear before you today as registered lobbyist for the Nebraska Bankers Association in support of LB 868. Mr. Keir did a nice job of giving you the historical background. The bankers were involved in the original drafting and adoption of the leaking underground storage tank fund, if you will. And the fund serves two important purposes, as they've noted already. One is it's kind of a backdoor insurance for smaller petroleum distributors and so forth. And it also provides the good duty of cleaning up contaminated sites. Lenders are involved because they obviously either have ongoing financing, or they may be financing a corner lot in the future where a gas station used to be located, where there could be some hidden contamination. We go through a lot of due diligence in terms of things that are generally referred to as phase 1 and phase 2 environmental site assessments to make sure that there isn't any contamination, or if there is, we know how to respond and react. The one nice thing about the law is, even though the responsible person is generally considered to be the owner or operator of the facility, voluntarily third parties, including lenders, parties who have a security interest or take a title by foreclosure can come in and also tap into the fund to better ensure that a contaminated site will be cleaned up. So for those reasons, we support the legislation and would encourage the committee to advance the bill. Be happy to address any questions.
Questions? Oh, you
Thank
got
you.
off easy. Thank you. Other supporters? Any opponents to the bill? Anyone to speak in a neutral capacity to LB 868? Senator Bostelman waives closing.
I will end the hearing, LB 868. For next,
Oh, proponents and opponents online. Let's see, there was one proponent, no opponents, and one neutral letter that we received on 868.
our next hearing is on LB 880. Afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chairman Bostelman, Vice Chair Mosier, members of the committee. My name is Matthew Howe, M-A-T-T-H-E-W-H-O-W-E. I'm the legislative aide to Senator Jana Hughes. She represents District 24 and is currently before the Judiciary Committee opening on another one of her bills. Therefore, I'm here today to open in her place on LB 880. LB 880 simply makes a technical amendment to the Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Fund statutes. Specifically, LB 880 strikes two references to the Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services in the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund Act. When the legislature passed LB 148 in 2021, the administration of the public water system program that was previously delegated to the state of Nebraska by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency switched from DHHS to NDEE. So as a result, LB 880 was introduced simply to remove those obsolete passages in statute. Director Jim Macy of NDEE is here to answer any technical questions you have about the bill or the loan program. On behalf of Senator Hughes, I thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you for your opening. Committee members, unless there's a technical question on the writing of the bill, otherwise I see none, so thank you.
Thank you.
Those who wish to testify in support of LB 880, please step forward. Afternoon, Director.
Good afternoon. Senator Bostelman and members of the Natural Resources Committee. My name is Jim Macy, spelled J-I-M-M-A-C-Y. I'm the Director of the Department of Environment and Energy. I'm here today to testify in support of LB 880. Before we begin, I want to thank Senator Hughes for agreeing to sponsor this bill on behalf of the department. As Mr. Howe stated earlier, this bill is a simple cleanup. It strikes two references to the Department of Health and Human Services, or DHHS, in the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund Act. In 2021, the Department of Health and Human Services environmental health programs merged into the Department of Environment and Energy under LB 148. NDEE now administrates both the Safe Drinking Water Act programs and the Clean Water Act programs delegated to us to the state from EPA. There's one location in statute under the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund Act that still references the coordination between DHHS and NDEE, where the two agency programs are working independently. LB 880 simply strikes the references to the NDE being required to coordinate with DHHS to be consistent with NDE's role after the merger. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Director. Other questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Anyone else would like to testify in support of LB 880? Please step forward. Any other testifiers in support? Anyone like to testify in opposition to LB 880? Anyone like to testify in opposition to LB 880? Seeing none, anyone like to testify in the neutral capacity? Seeing none, that will close our hearing on LB 880. And next bill will be LB 866.
This is such a happy place.
Do you have the proponents and opponents for this? 0 for all 3? Okay. For LB 866, there are no letters of support or opposition or neutral. Senator Bostelman. The floor is yours.
Play musical chairs today. Thank you. Good afternoon, Vice Chairman Mosier and members of the Natural Resource Committee. My name is Bruce Bostelman, spelled BRUCE-BOSTELMAN, and I represent Legislative District 23. I am here today to introduce LB 866. LB 866 was brought to me by the Nebraska Power Review Board. The board is the agency with primary jurisdiction over electric utilities in the state of Nebraska. The board believes the proposed changes are needed to address concerns over succession planning for the one board member designated to represent the board and the state of Nebraska on the Southwest Power Pools State Regulators Committee to alleviate recruitment difficulties for the board's required accountant position and to preserve continuity and technical expertise on the board. The board would like to make the following 4 changes to current law. It eliminates the requirement that one of the members of the board must be an accountant. I'm also bringing you AM 2112, which has been handed out, which clarifies the board can consist of 3 additional persons. During the drafting process, 2 lay persons was struck and 3 additional persons was mistakenly left out. It would allow one person at any time. Second, it would allow one person at any one time to be appointed to the board, even though the person had been an employee, officer, or director of an electric utility within the 4 years prior to his or her appointment. Third, it would increase the term limit for board members from 2 to 3 consecutive terms. And finally, it would increase the per diem for 4 of the board members from $60 to $100. I will briefly explain each of these in order. Regarding the accountant position, the board has found it increasingly difficult to find accountants willing to serve the board. The board has gone as long as 2 years without finding someone willing to serve the accountant on the PRB. The board was fortunate in that instance that the accountant on the board was willing to continue serving until his successor could be appointed. The board's most recent accountant resigned effective August 1, 2023. The board went without an accountant member through December of 2023. The board's request to remove the accountant requirement is an acknowledgement of the difficulties of finding an accountant willing to serve on the board. Next is the change to allow the one board member to have been an employee, director, or officer of an electric utility without regard to the length of time since they separated from the utility. The current requirement is that to be eligible for appointment to the board, a person must not have been an employee, director, or officer of an electric utility within the previous 4 years. The board has found that numerous people who work at a utility, then retire, change jobs, or otherwise separate from a utility are interested in serving on the board. After 4 years in retirement or at a non-utility job, that interest wanes. And it is far more difficult to find people interested in serving on the board. By making it difficult for retirees to serve on the board, the state loses a wealth of experience and expertise that could be well used on the Power Review Board. This is especially true when it comes to a board member who agrees to represent Nebraska on the Southwest Power Pool Regional State Committee. In 2009, the Lincoln Electric System, Nebraska Public Power District, and Omaha Public Power District joined the Southwest Power Pool Regional Transmission Organization. SPP is a critically important entity when it comes to electric industry in Nebraska and the entire central United States. An important entity that is part of the SPP system is the Regional State Committee or the RSC. The RSC is comprised of one commissioner or board member from each state that has transmission owning utility that is a member of the SPP. The vast majority of Power Review Board members have been people with a full-time job. Ever since Nebraska's utilities joined the SPP and the Power Review Board was able to appoint a member to serve on the RSC, the board member involved has had to take time off from their regular job to attend RSC and SPP meetings, sometimes using vacation time to do so. This creates an enormous burden for them. By allowing one member to be appointed without regard to how recently he or she worked for an electric utility, the board believes that it will be a great deal easier to find an interested person who has recently retired from a utility. Not only are those people often the most interested in serving, but it would allow recent retirees to serve. Such retirees would likely have the time to commit to service of the RSC without requiring such sacrifice to the regular job. In essence, this is a succession planning issue for the board to eliminate any concern that the board member that recently worked for a utility might be biased in favor of the utility where he or she worked. A provision was added requiring that member to recuse himself or herself if a matter involving the utility where they work comes before the board. The recusal requirement remains in place until the board member has been separated from the utility for 4 years. The change to allow board members to serve 3 consecutive terms instead of the current 2 is intended to provide for more consistency, retention of institutional knowledge, and greater experience on the board. As with the legislature, it often takes 2 or 3 years to really learn how an agency functions, especially with all the technical issues involved in the electric industry. Allowing the option to appoint a board member for a 3rd term would allow the state to take advantage of the knowledge board members have gained while on the board. This could help not only the board, but also the electric industry members and the public that the board works with and regulates. Finally, the bill would increase the per diem from 4 of the board members from $60 to $100 for each day in which they are engaged in board business. The board's RSC member already has a higher per diem due to the much greater workload they face. The board's per diem was set at $50 in 1971 and increased to the current $60 in 1978. The per diem has therefore not increased since 1978. It seems only fair with the increase in the board's activities and the passage of 45 years that the per diem be increased slightly. The statute caps the total per diem payments for each member at $6,000. The bill would increase the cap to $7,000 to mirror the increase in per diems. Power Review Board members perform their duties out of the sense of civic responsibility. I ask for the committee's support and to advance LB 866 to general file with AM 2112. I'd be happy to answer any questions, but if they are detailed, technical, I would defer to the board's executive director, Mr. Tim Texel, who is here today to testify after me on this bill. Thank you.
Questions for the testifier? Senator Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Bostelman, for bringing this bill to us, and it's the first hearing of the year. And this might be a technical question, so forgive me, and we can move on to Mr. Texel a bit. So my read of it would be one person could be appointed who has been prior been involved in electrical generation, essentially, right? Right now, a person could be appointed if they had been and sat out for 4 years. So is your intention that once that person's been appointed, they could serve for their 3 terms and then no other person who had worked in the electrical generation industry could be appointed during that 4 years?
They would have to be, I think, come back for reappointment each time.
But
they could do 3, they could serve.
But there's only one spot for a former employee executive.
Correct. And Mr. Texel probably can answer that.
I'll talk to him about that then. And then this, again, might be a technical question I can ask him. Is raising it to $7,000 enough? We're essentially raising the per diem by $40 from $60. We're only raising the total amount by $1,000. I don't know, like I guess that's what I can ask.
No, that's a good
Now
question,
you know what's
actually,
coming
and,
at you.
and, you know, the executive director to answer that, I agree, you know, is that enough? I'm not sure, but it's what the board has asked for, so the members asked for, so again, I would defer to Mr. Texel.
Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you, Senator. Are there supporters for the bill? Testify? Welcome.
Vice Chairman Mosher and members of the Natural Resources Committee. My name is Tim Texel. It's Tim, last name is Texel, and I am the Executive Director and General Counsel for the Nebraska Power Review Board. As Senator Bostelman mentioned in his opening, we're the state agency that has primary jurisdiction over electric suppliers in the state of Nebraska. And we'd like to first thank Senator Bostelman for bringing this bill on the board's behalf. We appreciate that. And he framed the background on this very well and gave you a lot of the facts. I will try to just go through briefly on the 4 issues and point out a little bit more context perhaps and answer any questions. On eliminating the requirement that one board member be an accountant, first of all, the board wants to convey that the board has no problem with an accountant on the board. As Senator Bostelman mentioned, we've just had a lot of difficulty over the years finding one, and we've been very lucky that one of them served a total of 20 years, so we didn't have to look. It was broken up because you can only do 2 consecutive terms, and then he came back after a 4-year hiatus and served for quite a long time. Other than that, we've had great difficulty finding accountants to be on the board. It's just an acknowledgement of the difficulties we face, nothing against accountants at all. Regarding the one board member to be appointed, even though he or she had been an employee, officer, director of a utility within the past 4 years. This is probably the crux of the purpose of 866, and we do consider this a kind of succession planning bill primarily to deal with our RSC issue and trying to be proactive. In 2009, when Nebraska became eligible to have a member of our board on the regional state committee at the Southwest Power Pool, we did appoint someone, and the RSC is an influential committee in the Southwest Power Pool structure, and it has authority over the costs for new transmission and how they're allocated. It doesn't tell you where to place them at that point, but they do deal with the cost allocation issue, and of course, how billions of dollars of costs are allocated is of enormous importance to our utilities, the state, and the electric customers. Ever since 2009, the board has been concerned what would happen if no board member were willing to volunteer to be the member designated to serve on the SPP RSC. There's a lot of travel involved, a lot of meetings involved, calls involved. So there's a lot of work involved, which is why the legislature agreed to increase the per diem for that person. And the board wants to be proactive to prevent that from happening, that nobody would raise their hand. And we weren't sure what would happen. We haven't faced that yet, so we're being proactive. We have found that a lot of well-qualified applicants that work for electric utilities after they retire can't be on the board because of the 4-year hiatus requirement. And we found that after 4 years, a lot of them are, want to golf and spend time with the grandkids, and they've learned, I don't want to be on the board anymore and have that commitment. So we lose a lot of people that would otherwise be on the board with a lot of experience. And there's some work involved to it. The recent retirees seem more willing to do that, although we have had people up to now that have been willing to. The board does plan to work closely with the governor's office to recruit individuals specifically to serve on the regional state committee, which would eliminate the concern of who might take over of the current board members. We'd have somebody lined up. So we're trying to take a lot of precautions about this. Regarding the term limit from 2 to 3 years, this is partly due to continuity in that, but it's also to help the regional state committee member who, once they get the experience not only on our board and with the industry, if they don't have that, they also have their knowledge about the regional state committee and the Southwest Power Pool, which is a whole nother learning curve involved. So 3 terms would help both our board members and especially the board member on the regional state committee, we believe. Regarding the per diem increase from 60 to 100, this, as Senator Bostelman mentioned, it applies to 4 of the 5 members. I mentioned earlier, the fifth one is the RSC member. They get $250 a day because they do so much more work. They don't just come in monthly for the board meeting, get emails from me and read some orders. The board member that served, and I mentioned that, as Senator Bostelman mentioned, the current $60 was set in 1978. So part of this, the board thought if we're going to have a bill and the rest of this, it was a good place to put this in. We didn't want to do it as a freestanding bill, but it's been 45 years since any per diem increase. And the $6,000 to $7,000 increase, I calculated in the fiscal note, and my business manager and I went through, and we thought $1,000 was reasonable given the timeframes, the 3 years we used for an average. If the committee would like to increase that, we're very open. We tend to be very fiscally conservative, and I'm cautious about that, making it look like we're asking for a lot more than we might need. If you'd want to make another 1,000, we're fine with that. And finally, I'd like to say that we did coordinate with the electric utilities before bringing this, and they were supportive. So my light is red.
Questions for the testifier? Senator Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. Thank you for being here, Director. Well, yes, that was I just did the quick math here. My math was at $6,000 limit, that's 100 days for the $60, right? So if we raise it to $100 at 7,000, we're not going to get as many days.
It's only 4 members too. The fifth, the one member's separate, the RSC member. So this would only apply to 4 of the 5 members. The fifth one has a separate limit in the statute because they make $250 instead of $60.
So just to clarify, maybe I'm confused. The 7,000 is a total limit?
For the 4 members that the $60
So
applies
it's not
to.
7,000 a person.
It's
Could be maybe.
the $7,000 is a, and I have to check the statute again for the limit on that.
My read of it would be 7,000, the limit is $100 a day, and then the not to exceed 7,000. So my read of that would be not to exceed
It's
7,000.
been a while
per
since I
person.
looked at that.
I guess,
Apologize.
I don't know if it makes a difference. I'll have to
but-
think about it, but.
And I'd have to
70
look at
days.
it, but I'd have to look at it quick, but I go through in the fiscal note why that makes sense with the increase. And we thought that this would probably cover it. Like I said, if the committee would want to increase it, that'd be fine. We didn't want to make it look like we're trying to pad the numbers and put a lot into it. So we thought that would increase it. But the $60, I think, would be for each person that was in there. So that's why I chose that number. The number of meetings that most of the board members go to and the days they're involved is not anywhere approaching what the RSC member does. So, and then there's only 4 out of 5 that do that. If that makes sense. So,
I got you. Could I go back to my question I asked Senator Bostelman about, is this a total bar on, is the intention that it would be only one person could be an alumni of a
at a
general
time.
in say a 12-year period? Because the person could serve.
If the other person was serving at that time, there's one person at a time on the board that it had been the 4 years, but after they've met that 4 years, then that would go away. Because
So once they get reappointed, they would no longer take up that spot.
they'd be past the 4 years, right?
Okay.
Because they'd be, because it talks about the 4-year separation of current statute, and we build that into this one to give that bias protection. But once the 4 years is passed, they wouldn't be someone within 4 years anymore. So if they got reappointed, assuming they served the whole 4 years, this would be a new appointment and they'd be beyond 4 years from their separation with the utility. So you could theoretically put a new person on. There can only be one person at a time that has served for a utility within 4 years.
Okay.
So necessarily the reappointments would take you out of that window unless you're appointed to fill somebody else's slot and you're only there for a year.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I think I follow you. I'm not
Okay.
sure I agree with you 100%, but I'll reread it to see if that's, it's the last question, kind of unrelated, but this includes someone who is any elected official in the state or was an elected officer of a public utility?
Both, because it talks about an elected state official or someone who's a officer, employee, or director of a utility.
Right.
So it has 2 separate parts, and the legislature put that in where there's elected state officials and officials from utilities, I assume because of potential bias on both parts. I'm not sure. That was done long before I was around.
So I'm sorry, I kind of lost the thread there. Would it be a bar from Mike Jacobson serving because he was, we'll say in the future, Mike, because he was an elected official of the state of Nebraska, or do they have to be an elected member of a utility? So OPPD or NPPD board?
If there's a state senator, they have to wait 4 years from their
Okay.
separation from being a sort of state senator. If they're a director, employee, or officer of a utility, they have to wait 4 years too. So there's two different groups. There's the elected state officials, I assume the governor and treasurer and state senators, and then there's the officials from utilities. Was built in 1963 for whatever reason. I mean, I'm pretty sure the utility officials obviously was because they didn't want somebody on who was either angry at their utility or very happy with their utility, and they're, biased toward their utility. So that makes sense. And so we wanted to build in that 4-year protection. And if that comes up, if they're voting on a matter before our board within 4 years, then they're going to recuse themselves until the 4-year separation has occurred. So if they're in there, they get reappointed and it's the 5th year, then they don't have to recuse themselves anymore. And they could, if they were from NPPD, Nebraska Public Power District, after the 5th year, they could vote on an NPPD application again. Because that same separation that's built in the statute now would apply after the change of the statute too.
Senator Jacobson?
Yeah, I just want to clarify. So when we're talking about a per diem here, are we also saying that then there would be mileage on top of that?
Mileage is also covered. We didn't increase that, but
But I assume you're paying.
we pay for all out-of-pocket expenses.
Gotcha. And then this is a per diem on top of it.
This is the per diem
Gotcha.
payment for their service.
So if a state senator wanted to leave and go into this, it would be an appropriate wind down from the $1,000 a month to $100.
So you get paid out-of-pocket expenses and
Gotcha.
travel and lodging, and you get the meals under the current per diem amount and not the
Right.
reimbursement they used to use.
Well, and I really appreciate, again, Senator Bostelman bringing this, because I really believe that I just see this across the state, and particularly as I get into rural areas, we are so caught up in people having a potential conflict that we seem to eliminate people with great expertise to serve on these boards. And we don't get good decisions because we have, in some cases, we need that expert there. It's good to have a cross section of people, but you need somebody that's a subject expert, I think. And that's missing if we eliminate that option. So I'm glad to see the change. I think it's appropriate. Thank you for your testimony.
And I would agree with that, and I think my board would too. We don't want all utility people on there. It's intended to be somewhat a late person board. I know bill drafters came up with the language in the amendment, and we're fine with that. But we don't want all utility people on there, but it really helps to have some utility people on there, in my experience, because they know what's going on in the industry so well. And I'm an attorney, and over 25 years, I've got a lot of experience with the electric utilities, but the engineers on our board are very helpful with the technical side. And when you come down to the SPP, it's very helpful to have, we've always had an engineer on that went to the SPP because they find that very interesting. It's usually the lawyers and engineers that find that very interesting. Unfortunately, the accountants have always told me they want to be involved with the civic responsibility, but our particular board with electric utilities doesn't really excite them. And it's just the nature of the beast, I guess.
Accountants might be hard to get excited about a lot of things.
Well, if it had something to do with accounting, they might be very interested, finances, but our board has not been. We've tried, but so it's like I said, it's an acknowledgement of the reality. Nothing against accountants. We'd be happy to have one on the board, and we have one now. Who, fortunately, we filled that slot for the moment.
Further questions for the testifier?
One brief one.
Okay. Senator Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. He's already cut me off earlier in the session. Does this rule apply to anybody that's currently on the board or in contemplation of anybody currently on the board?
It would apply if you extend the term limits. I think it would apply to the people who are on the board now because you'd be able to serve 3 instead of 2. So anybody who's in their second term, the governor could choose to reappoint them if he was so inclined.
But none of the other concerns are arising out of the result of anybody that's on the board currently?
No, it's like the accountant member. Our accountant member just started. It was his first meeting last time. You will be seeing him shortly for his confirmation. He was appointed during the interim, so he's an acting board member now. Has nothing to do with him. The accountant members, we're lucky we got him. Actually, until December, we didn't have him. Late December, we didn't have him on the board. So we just have these hiatuses where we don't have any accountant member, and we've gone to the Board of Public Accountancy to find one, and they can't find one. And it's been difficult. And if we didn't have the one gentleman I mentioned earlier who held over for 2 years on 2 different occasions, I think we'd be having a lot longer periods where we don't have one. So that wasn't the crux of the bill, but it is something to fix. And we went with the utilities and they agreed that we don't have to have an accountant on the board. The lawyer engineer is very helpful and important on the board.
Thank you.
Okay, further questions? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
More supporters for 866.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Mosier and members of the Natural Resources Committee. For the record, my name is Shelley Salings-Art, S-H-E-L-L-E-Y. Salings-Art is S-A-H-L-I-N-G-Z-A-R-T. I am here today. I'm Vice President and General Counsel for Lincoln Electric System, but I am here today testifying in support of LB 866 on behalf of the Nebraska Power Association, which represents all of Nebraska's public power electric utilities, including municipalities, public power districts, public power and irrigation districts, rural power districts, and cooperatives. Senator Bostelman spoke to me right before the hearing and said he heard a crazy rumor that I was coming in to testify in support of one of his bills, and it's true. Here I am. It's his final year. I couldn't resist that opportunity. He may not feel that way next week, but we'll talk about that then. I want to thank Senator Bostelman for introducing this bill on behalf of the Power Review Board. I also want to thank the Power Review Board, especially Chuck Hutchison, Kristen Gottschalk, and the Executive Director, Tim Texel, for reaching out to the industry and engaging us. And you wonder why that's important. It's important for a few reasons. Most of you probably know the Power Review Board is a cash-funded agency, so it is funded solely through assessments on the electric utilities. So we pay the costs you all are talking about, and we are very supportive of this bill. I've been in this industry for 35 and a half years. I have had a front row seat to a lot of changes in the industry. It is, we've had a lot, and the SPP has certainly added a level of complexity that requires a lot of oversight. Those of us that are in SPP think the regional state committee representation from Nebraska is incredibly important. And we do want to make sure we have good quality people in that position. Senator Kavanaugh, you asked if the amounts are enough. I think we would tell you, no, they probably aren't. But that's what the Power Review Board was comfortable putting in. I think the industry would support a little bit more, again, because our focus is to make sure that we have good quality and continuity of representation for Nebraska. So I think you've covered most of the questions. You all have expressed concerns on a number of our bills about utility experience. I think that's really important on this board. I'm really glad to see that open up. And I'm really glad Senator Bostelman didn't put in an amendment that would preclude me from doing that someday. I don't have any intention of doing that.
Okay, questions from the committee? Wow, you got by easily. Thank you.
I did. Thank you.
Anybody else to speak in support? Anybody here to speak against it? Anybody to speak in opposition? Is anyone here to speak in a neutral capacity? Seeing none. Senator Bostelman waives his closing. That concludes our hearing for today. Thank you for attending.
Letters.
There were no letters.
Oh,
You guys don't trust Mosier.
this is better than Disneyland.
What's that?